Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, you guys. We are back.
Boom.
Ethan and I have been, honestly, if you would have asked us a year ago, we probably would have said that we were done with a podcast.
Yeah, we even revamped it for, I think, 1 or 2 episodes.
Yes.
And then we just kind of went... Pfft.
But you know what? We have gone through some crazy life changes in the last probably 3 months.
Yes.
And we have just felt the urge to revamp our whole entire podcast in a way that we get to involve you guys.
100%.
So we will be interviewing you with your inspiring, amazing stories, all from Minnesota. If you have any, we will have a link below in our podcast description that you can fill out and just tell us a little bit about yourself, your story. And we would love to have you. We're not going to have you here. We have an office now.
Yes.
But we are also revamping the office.
So many things to talk about. Yeah, we got an office space. It's going to be beautiful coffee shop right down the street. It's kind of an old downtown area, and we're currently renovating it right now to make it just this cozy, awesome, inviting space for you guys to come and tell your stories. It's going to be raw. It's going to be emotional, but it's going to, I feel like, just create a space for more people to just open up and share things that they feel like they haven't been able to. Yeah.
And I think it's really good for others to hear a story that's very similar to theirs, and that you feel inspired and hopeful that you will be able to go on with whatever hard you're going through.
Yes.
Ethan and I have been through some major hard. And so it's our turn to start first with our story. And our story just kind of includes our family and kind of what has happened with us. We will be getting eventually into like marriage and therapy and all that. But we want to tell you our first story that basically pushed us into therapy and self-help and like being stronger mentally than what we were.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing that, and we're going to get into it like Courtney said, but the main thing was Nevaeh going through her stroke and the subsequent brain surgeries. And that whole journey is what really pushed us, like Courtney said, to start going to therapy because of the PTSD and never really processing it correctly.
Yeah.
But then it's like, what, 10% of our therapy episodes have been about that? But therapy just opened the door for us to just work on everything about us.
Yeah, and I think too, like with therapy, we started therapy after Nevaeh's stroke, and during therapy is when we went through her brain surgeries as well. And it was such a timing thing that we were able to do therapy and be even stronger for her when she had her brain surgeries.
Absolutely.
So let's take it back to December 2020. A couple weeks before this, actually, it was like the weekend before Nevaeh's stroke. We had visited Ethan's brother and our sister-in-law and their kids, just for like to get out of the house. Because if you guys remember 2020, of course, nobody forgets that. But there were times during the year that like in the spring or in the summer, things opened up and then they shut back down. And this was right around another shutdown. Yeah,
it was late November, I think, is when we went to visit my brother and his wife. And there was an instance, and I'm trying to recall kind of everything behind it. I think Courtney knows it, but there was an instance there that we think is where it all started.
So we were all just kind of hanging out. It was right around like Thanksgiving break-ish. And we were there. They were all hanging out. And all of a sudden, Nevaeh she went immediately really flush. She started shaking. She thought she was low, but she was actually really, really high.
That's right.
And for those of you who don't know, our daughter also has type 1. So when I say high, we just mean her blood sugars were really high. And then, but she felt low. And if you are a type 1 diabetic, low feels like you're really shaky. You're about to pass out. That's how she felt. And it was like a quick thing. It was like there and gone. And then she was like, I feel better. And then a couple days after that is when the stroke started to hit without us realizing. So we had driven home and my sister, she has 6 kids. They're all homeschooled. they were like, we should go on a nature walk.
Yeah. And there's like a little nature preserve.
Yep.
Literally where they used to live at their old house. It was halfway between both of our houses. So we literally met there. It was me, my brother-in-law, Matt, all of his kids and all of our kids.
Yep. So you guys went on a walk. Went on
maybe a 15 to 20 minute walk through the woods, nice nature preserve area. But I remember,
it was December, so it was cold.
Yeah, it was. And none of the kids remembered to bring their mittens. Like, I don't even know, there was maybe a little dusting of snow on the ground. Like it was, It wasn't like crazy cold, but it was getting cold out. So I remember Nevaeh specifically saying, my hand is numb. And I was like, well, yeah, you forgot your mittens. So once we get back to the car, we'll warm them up. And then if they're still numb when we get home, we'll put, have some hot chocolate and hold it.
Yeah.
Where it'll help warm it up.
Right.
Which we did. We got home. She still said it was numb. I'm like, let's make some hot chocolate. And she held it. And it still wasn't getting any better. And
yeah, eventually she came up and was like, my hand just feels really tingly. And I just knew it's like that kind of thing when you go outside and your like hands feel, because it's cold, your hands feel numb. So we were like, okay, we'll warm it up. I had a heated blanket.
Yep.
So we put that on her arm. But then eventually it got to the point where she was like, it's really heavy. I can't lift it. And yes. I was like, what? What do you mean? She just kind of went, like it was really hard lifting it from in the front of her. And so then
I feel like she used one hand when we were eating dinner. She used one hand, her other hand, to pick up her left arm to like set it on the table. And we were like, what?
But I have this like, now Ethan is way calmer than I am when it comes to medical things. And so I immediately was like, you got to take her in. Like, you got to take her in. And I know that I should say, like, you have this, okay, I got to stay calm, but it did freak you out also.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I had called the nurse line right away.
Yeah.
And within 5 minutes, they were like, you need to bring her into the emergency room.
Yep.
And so I loaded her up and we headed right down because, again, let's remind, this was COVID.
Yeah.
And so just not a lot of people allowed in and out of the hospital. And so I'm like, I'm just going to go. We took her. Obviously, we had the boys at home. Nevaeh stayed with Courtney stayed with the boys.
Calm.
We headed to the hospital about 25 minutes away. And I knew it was bad when we got to the hospital. And you normally walk in, they check you in, you sit in the lobby, blah, blah, blah. I walked in and they had like a team waiting for her, like right when we walked into the ER lobby. And I'm like, okay. We were there for maybe 15 minutes before they're like, I think we need to get you down to Children's Hospital, like ASAP. We can either load her into an ambulance and take her, or if you feel okay driving her, you can just go ahead and drive her. And I'm like, I'll just drive her.
Yeah.
So we drove down to Children's Hospital emergency room, which again, they had a whole team waiting for her when we got there. And the first thing that they did, besides like get her hooked up to like IV and everything, was to do a CT scan, which they did that night. And they were like, we need to rule out a stroke. And I was like, what? Stroke, like in a 10-year-old.
Yeah. She was 10 at the time and also a diabetic. So I have this like rule. Actually, Ethan said it. He's like, you can't Google.
Yeah.
Because I am a natural low-key hypochondriac, and that just stems from childhood stuff, which we will definitely be getting into because my dad had cancer very young. And so I just grew up knowing like anything can happen.
Yep.
Like anything. But a stroke in a 10-year-old was absolutely not what I was thinking. Rachel had came over that night. We were just going to watch Real Housewives. And thank you, Jesus, for that random day and for her to be there. It was honestly like the best thing that I needed at that time.
Yeah.
Because like oh my gosh, I'm already crying. She's like, I'll Google, but I'm not going to tell you what I'm Googling, okay?
Yeah.
But like the top thing was diabetics and neuropathy. And so I was like, oh, yep, you're right. Like they have a hard time. Circulation issue.
Yep.
So I was like, perfect. So then I'm home with the boys. We're like, okay, it's probably just that, So we watch our shows. I think we had like True Fru at the time.
Yeah.
It was perfect. However, I had no clue really what was going on with Ethan and Nevaeh. Like, he would tell me, like, okay, they're sending us to Children's. I'm like, okay. And so after the CT scan, you text me and you said, they ruled out a stroke. And I was like,
what?
Wonderful. I wasn't even thinking that.
Yeah, didn't even know that was an option.
Yeah. So they told Ethan,
yeah, no stroke, but obviously something's going on. So we need to keep her overnight and then we'll do some more testing in the morning.
Yep.
So they admitted us. And I'll go back to what Courtney just said, where she was at home. So like I was updating her, but also at the same time, from my perspective, with her not being there, I didn't feel like I wanted to update her on necessarily everything that was happening because I knew that she would want to be there and
I would be freaked out.
You would be freaked out.
100%.
One of those things and I visibly remember this, or clearly remember this, when we were walking out of the hospital that we went to first, while we were going to the car to drive down to the Children's Hospital, I remember looking back, Nevaeh was walking with me and her left foot was starting to like drag a little bit and like catch on the sidewalk, because when it first started, it was arm. But
the left arm, I do want to, we didn't say that, but yes, it was her left arm that started going numb first. So then
Yep.
So then it was the left foot. So the
left leg. So the stroke was actively progressing as we were headed down to Children's Hospital kind of throughout this thing.
Yep.
And then at the Children's Hospital, throughout like the CT scan and after they admitted us and like throughout the night and after we were admitted, everything, the left side of her face started to droop as well.
Yeah.
And so then the next day, well, do we want to keep going with that or just go into the next testing that they were doing?
Yeah. So just in the background, just so we can give like a full picture, I was here with the boys. In the morning, I had talked to my mom and I was like, I'm going to go to the hospital. Can you hang out with the boys?
Yeah.
So she couldn't hang out with them till like 10 or something. And so I dropped them off and then I was headed to the hospital. And while I was headed to the hospital that next day, mind you, I had no idea about her leg. I had no idea about her face. While I was driving Ethan, they needed an MRI of her brain.
Yep.
And when you need an MRI of your brain, you absolutely cannot move.
Yeah.
Nevaeh was 10.
Mm-hmm.
She was fully freaked out.
Yeah.
Which, it's claustrophobic. Like, if you've ever been in an MRI, it's scary. And when you're a kid, it is even worse. But also, she has pods and Dexcoms. Every time you get an MRI, those have to come off. So we have to constantly check her blood.
Yeah.
And so you can kind of share how that.
Yeah, that was literally, with everything medical that we've gone through, that 2 to 2.5 hour chunk of time that it took to get the MRI done was the worst experience of my life and Nevaeh together, because I didn't know what was going on as a parent.
Yep.
They'd already said no stroke. And so we're like, okay, what are we testing now? Nevaeh's strapped in on this flat like board, that sends her into the MRI chamber. And they're like, you don't want to watch a movie? And they started to try to watch a movie. She was panicking and shaking, and they didn't want to give her sedation, which we do now anytime that she gets an MRI so she can be still. But they didn't want to do sedation because that would have affected the images or something. They wanted a clear image if a stroke was actually happening. They wanted that to not be affected. I'm holding her hand while she's in the MRI chamber, and I have my head turned, and I'm just like tears running down my face. And she's crying. I'm crying. I'm trying not to let her see me cry. I'm trying to be the strong parent that she needed to have, but I did.
Sometimes it's good. I just feel like it's okay to show emotion.
Yeah.
And still be strong.
Yeah.
You're human.
It was tough.
She was crying, and then she threw up. Yep. And then she got the hiccups.
Yep. It was just a recipe for disaster. Like I said, this MRI normally in the past, or since then when we've had it done, it's maybe an hour.
Yeah.
Hour, 15 minutes. It was like 2.5 hours that we were in there because they kept having to start over. And it was brutal. And so my plan was when Courtney got to the hospital that I would go out and meet her and I would kind of fill her in on, hey, this is what's going on. I hadn't told her a lot of things like I mentioned about the leg and the face. I wanted her to be prepared. But when I went out and found her as she pulled up and then brought her like to the parking ramp, I jumped in the car and absolutely lost it. Mm-hmm. Like the emotion just hit me because I'm just having to stay strong for her. But then I see Courtney and I'm like, just turn into a puddle. And so she's trying to comfort me and I'm telling her about this horrible experience, the MRI, and I totally blank out on even sharing anything with her about what to expect when she sees Nevaeh. So then Courtney sees Nevaeh.
Yeah. Like he said, I picked him up and he was emotional and I was like, whoa, I missed a lot. But when I walked into the room, she said, hi, Mom.
Yeah.
And she smiled at me. And I remember like when you get dental work done, you're like, when you're like droopy, that's how her face looked.
Yep.
And I was like, looked at Ethan and I'm the kind of person, I feel like I need to be prepared.
Absolutely.
So I don't actively freak her out because I'm freaked out by in a matter of 12 hours, how much had changed.
Yeah.
And so I looked at Ethan and I was like, hi. And I was trying to hold it together. And then she said, I have to go to the bathroom. And from the night before, she absolutely had nothing wrong with her legs.
Yeah.
But she couldn't walk with her left leg. She had this strap around her and the nurse had to take her. And I was like, I need to go outside for 1 second. And I remember, I will never forget it. And I just want to tell you right now, if you are a nurse and you have ever comforted, I'm sure you've comforted everyone, but I just want you to know that like we are incredibly thankful. I don't even know the name of the lady. I couldn't even tell you her face because I had tears. I was sobbing by the window in a corner. I didn't want anybody to see me. I didn't want anybody to like touch me. I was just like, I need to have a moment by myself, you know? And this nurse came and she brought me a water and she brought me a Kleenex and she just put her hand on my back. And I was like, thank you, you know?
Yep.
And
she didn't ask what you needed.
Nope. She did not.
She just did something to help.
She just gave me water and tissues. And I was like, that's all I needed at that time. And then Ethan came and I was like, why did you not tell me that? How could you not? And he's like, I didn't want to freak you out. Like, I think you thought like, I'm not going to tell her left leg's not working, her left arm's not working, her face is drooping, and then she has to drive. I think that's like where your brain was going because like it was COVID. We could only have me and Ethan there at the time. We couldn't have my mom there or my dad. The kids, I had to drive by myself. And so he hugged me. He like, you apologized. And I remember we went into the room and we sat there and like within 2 minutes, they were like, she's having a stroke. And I remember being like, Nevaeh was sitting on the bed and I was on this bench and she was listening, but she's 10.
Yeah.
She has no idea, but she knows it's something because we immediately were like, I wish I didn't know that in front of her, I guess. I wish I would have heard that separately because...
Yeah, take us out of the room and tell us news like that.
Yeah. But, you know, it is what it is. I didn't want to like bawl in front of Nevaeh. So we were like, okay, what do we do next? Yeah. And we, in that moment, had to be way more strong than we ever thought we could ever be.
Yep.
And I know people, and Nevaeh too, like Nevaeh had not a clue. I still don't think understands like the gravity of like a stroke.
No.
In a kid. And I'm honestly, I'm glad because she had that childlike, like,
yep.
It is what it is.
What is that? Naive.
Yeah. Just whatever. She remembered all the nurses' names. Oh, yeah. She was like, oh, Austin, that one nurse, he was so nice. So anyways, basically the doctor had said at that point, we are watching it for the next 24 hours. We need to see if her brain swells. We will have to remove part of her skull and let her brain swell and then go back. And then we would put the skull back on.
And to give you guys a little bit of a background, the reason the CT scan did not show a stroke is because a CT scan only shows hemorrhagic strokes, which are like a brain bleed.
And is that like you get in a car accident? It's like an aggressive thing, right?
Like a traumatic
event that her brain was.
Whereas Nevaeh had an ischemic stroke, which is like a temporary blockage of oxygen. So that doesn't show up on a CT scan, but on an MRI, they can see that. So that's why they're like, oh, no stroke. And we were like, well, didn't know that was an option. And then the next day they're like, she had a stroke. We're like, talk about whiplash.
Yeah. And I, at the time, like, I didn't understand. Ethan is way good at like listening to medical things and like understanding immediately. But like for me, that's the kind of stroke that older people get.
Yeah.
Like blockage in their vessels. We've learned a lot about her brains and her vessels, which we will go in when she's on the podcast because she's really excited to share her story too and her view of it. And I can't wait. She's matured so much since then and is just such a inspiring kid. Then they took us straight to the ICU.
Yep.
And we stayed there for 5-6 days, a week.
They basically were like, for the next 72, like, we're not going to be out of the woods for like 72 hours, I think is what they told us. So it was basically like 3 days of like touch and go. Monitor, she was hooked up to all the vitals. She had EKG all over her head that were like glued to her hair. And we just had to sit there and ride it out with the amount of people that were coming in every, half hour. I think, did they actively start like PT and OT right away, or did they wait until after we were kind of out of the woods a little bit?
They waited to have PT until after, which it was, she had all these electrodes on her head and stuff. And it's like I think what bothered her the most about the whole entire stroke was taking those off of her head.
Yeah.
Like that was the only thing that
caused discomfort. Stand. Well, besides the MRI. Yeah.
Yeah. So we were in the ICU. They were checking on her every hour as we had a nurse in there.
Yeah.
And she lost complete control of her left arm.
Yep.
Her left leg,
and her face.
Yeah. Her left leg, she could walk, but it was almost like, when your leg goes numb.
Yeah.
And you're walking and
that's
you kind of get this like, it locks a little bit. It's like she didn't have that. She could still walk, but it was just a little bit different. She had to have a walker.
She didn't really have any muscle control. Like she had sensation, like you touch and do. I mean, the amount of neurological testing that we've learned about that we still use to this day. If we're like, what's wrong? Are you okay? Like, let me check something. Like we're always doing it. Like I feel like it's every other week we're checking things.
Squeeze my hand.
Yeah. Squeeze my hand. Let's see if they're the same. It's just stuff that we learned throughout the PT and OT and stuff. But
yeah, I do want to mention, like, while we were at the hospital, Ethan and I, even with the diabetes, I think any way for us to not be completely consumed with anger and feeling defeated is we constantly had we had worship music, but we also were constantly, this is whatever was positive about that day. It could be the littlest thing. That's what we focused on, because if we let ourselves go into the dark hole of why is this happening to us? Why is this happening to her again? As much as I am like, stop with you want your child to be 100% okay.
Right.
And when they're not, you're not okay. And it is really hard. It's like it's like a mind exercise to be like, you know what?
It really is.
We are looking at the absolute positive, even if it's just, I saw the sun for 5 seconds today.
Yep.
Every day, Nevaeh had a goal, and the only thing she wanted to do was get out of the hospital so she could be with her dogs.
Yep.
So after we were out of the clear, which Ethan said it was 72 hours, it was the hardest 72 hours I think we had ever gone through, because we also still had the boys. We had Austin and Gray, and I didn't want them to feel neglected either. Not neglected, but like forgotten about almost, I guess.
Yep.
And so Ethan stayed at the hospital with Nevaeh 24/7. I would go home, I would be with the boys, I would give them hugs, and then I would be there the next day.
Snuggle them.
Yep. They made hot chocolate bombs. My mom is so good at being like, I think if you have kids and like one kid is going through something or whatever, having activities for the other kids to do, because their minds are going crazy too. Yeah. Not crazy, but more like their brains are heavy too. Like they didn't understand Nevaeh had a stroke either until they saw her, and they didn't physically see her until after she came home from the hospital.
Yeah.
And that was the hardest. That's when Austin lost it, because he was like, I didn't know it was that bad. They are the two most amazing brothers ever. And they have been through just as much as we have.
Yeah, they have. I didn't realize how much emotion this was going to bring back up.
Yeah. We talk about it in therapy a lot.
Yeah, we do.
And if somebody tells you if you have PTSD or if you have a traumatic event for you, do not let anyone tell you that, oh, that wasn't big enough for you to have trauma about. Your trauma is your trauma.
Yep.
And something big to you may not be big to someone else, but it is big to you.
Yep. That's all that matters.
And that is all that matters. So she's lost complete control of her left arm. They did so much PT. Remember the vibrating thing and trying to get feeling back into it. Once we were out of the clear, these they were like, we are getting it back. The faster we get her brain to reroute different, what do they call it?
Nerve pathways. And
And as much as I think the one thing that we just clung on to was the doctor said, you never want your child to go through this stroke. However, if we are being positive, she is young, she can learn new ways to be able to move her leg, move her arm. She was also partially blind in her left eye, her peripheral vision. And they said like, she will be able to make new pathways. So that was our goal.
Yeah.
100%.
And one of the other positives, since we're on that note, was they were like, if you, not that we would ever wish a stroke on anybody, but if you had to, a right-sided stroke is going to be the least impactful, because like if it was a left-sided stroke, it would have cognitive, memory function, speech, like all that stuff. Right-sided just affected the left side of her body.
Yeah.
So none of that, like she was all good. She could remember everything, names,
she remembers, she still
stuff.
Even now remembers all the nurses. She knows all of her doctors.
But the other one thing that I wanted to touch on before we talk about like going out of the hospital is I remember like the last day that we were there.
While we were there, I do think another one of the things that kind of our brains, when you are in the hospital, it feels like, even if you're there for 3 days, it feels like 3 months. It's a weird feeling. But we were in the ICU, and one of the things that Ethan and I and Nevaeh, we would, as soon as she started doing PT and she was walking with her walker, we had to have like a band around her so we could hold her just in case she were to fall. But we walked the halls and we would go to this window.
Yep. And
every time we walked there, you see these little babies. And it just, there is always, I feel like there is always something to be thankful for. And some of these babies, they're there all the time.
Yeah.
And some parents are there, some parents aren't there. And as hard as this was, there is always perspective.
Yeah.
And so we went through those halls and we just were like, Nevaeh, I remember her, I have a video of her looking and walking, and she just would be like, Mom, look at that little tiny baby. I'm like, I know. And it's like, she has such this strong brain that I know she knew, like, I'm going to be better. I'm going to be out of here. But that for her was her goal. It was to be out of there. But it takes a lot to just shift your brain to go, okay, go to the ICU. It's heartbreaking to be there. So.
Well, and Nevaeh was so determined too. Like, one of the big things that she needed to check off before we left, I want her to say, wasn't it like 12 steps or was it 15? For some reason, those numbers,
an amount of steps. Yeah.
There's a certain amount of steps they wanted her to take, like up the stairs, like with assistance with like a belt.
Yep. She had that belt.
Belts. And she hit that level the last day, but she didn't just hit it. She just like kept going. Like, I'm going to show off.
Yeah.
I'm going to show you guys. And yeah.
She did that with her brain surgery too, remember?
Yep.
She's like power walking. We're all like, oh my God, Nevaeh. Like, okay.
Like, I want to get out of here, back to my dogs.
She's like, I'm fine. I don't need you. She's honestly so amazing. She had to get these steps. But before we left, like she could walk, but.
Yeah, like say walk like with very loose term. Like she could walk with like a walker.
Not by herself.
No, she would have.
She couldn't go to the bathroom by herself. Because she said, so the doctor told us, the stroke doctor, before we left, she was like, yep, you can go. You know, she just kind of like put her arm in a cast because she wasn't moving her left arm at all. She said, yeah, kids can live a completely normal life.
Without the use of a limb. Without
the use of their left arm. And I remember saying like, well, which of course is very true. They do it all the time.
Right.
Because I remember being like, well, what is she supposed to do with like her arm if she's running and stuff and it's just hanging? Like, you can't have your arm just hanging.
Yeah.
But that's kind of how it was because it was numb. She had no muscle in it.
Yep.
And before we left, they wanted to have some sort of like feel the muscle
contract,
like firing is what they said. And it never happened.
Yeah.
And she was like, she may never use her left arm again. And I was like, well, what is she supposed to do with it? And she's like, well, kids have a sling in it, whatever. And I remember being like, okay, I'm going to have to change my, like, you have a view of what your kids are going to be like. When you have kids, I don't think anyone thinks they're going to go through something like that.
No.
And so you almost have to, and we learn this in therapy too, you almost have to have that vision of your life. You kind of grieve what you thought you were going to have at that moment. Because like we didn't know if she was going to move her left arm ever.
Yep.
But you guys, we came home that night and it was like this house, her family, her dogs,
neighbors.
Gave her, neighbors, friends, everyone gave her that like love and prayer and whatever. And she got so excited. We could feel, do you remember that?
Yeah, it was like one of our neighbors made like this cool welcome home sign and like, cause he would always, call her princess or whatever and like joke around with her and he made a sign and they had that for her and everybody brought gifts over. And I think one of the most, that was powerful enough to have just the outpouring of support from family and friends and community. But then that night, like we all sat around and like, let's all pray over her. Cause I know like Courtney said, like you hear that from the doctor and you're like, wow, that could really impact, that could change, that could be our new normal. But I think the more that we thought about it, talked about it, prayed about it, we're like, you know what? We're not going to accept that. Like we believe that that's not going to be her story.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so we all prayed over her that night. And wasn't it that night that she was sitting in the couch And was it your mom or you?
It was my mom.
Yeah.
And Austin was there too. I remember Austin was the one who said, I feel her shoulder muscle.
Yeah.
And we were like, what? Because we had this vibrating thing. We had we had to do these stretches and all of this stuff with her. We had never felt the muscle in there trigger or fire. And it was that night.
Yeah.
Austin was like, I feel it. And then you could see Nevaeh like, yeah, I feel, and then she kept it going. It just made her so excited.
Yeah.
That she just kept every freaking day working on it.
Yeah. From starting where she couldn't move her hand, but she could feel that it was like firing just a little bit to the point where, we obviously had the PT and OT, but to the point where she was obviously all the way through it, which launches us into the PT and OT discussion.
Yep. So for reference, what we have learned with strokes is when you lose complete control of your arms, your bigger muscles come back first.
Correct.
The muscles in your hands and the movement in your fingers, that is slower because it's harder to relearn that. Yep. These big muscles, like they're coming back faster. Like her leg came back within a week.
Yeah.
But her arm.
Yeah. Which we neither us nor did the PT or OT expect. Like they literally were like, we have a year window here where whatever she's going to get back, she's going to get back.
Yep.
It might not be much. It might be a lot. It might be somewhere in the middle. Like we don't know. We're just going to have to see how her body reacts.
Yeah.
So we had planned like, okay, we're committing to a year of PT and OT. And it was the first 2 months, probably every single day. We had to drive down about a half hour to the closest children's PT and OT. And it was always back-to-back appointments. Like she'd have PT and then she'd go to OT. So it was like 2 hours every day that she had to do this. And then they kind of like weaned it down a little bit where it was like every other day and then a couple days a week. She got graduated at 6 months from PT and OT with like, 95% of her function back. Even to this day, like you wouldn't be able to tell. Like we can, like certain things, like with her right hand, it's like super fast. And with this one, it's just a little slower. Like Courtney was saying, those kind of finer movements that aren't the big muscle movements, but you'd never be able to tell.
No. She is, with everything she's gone through, which if we were to like list it, it's type 1, celiacs, Hashimoto's, a stroke, and then 2 brain surgeries.
Correct.
She has always been, she's the kid that does not take what you're telling her at face value.
Correct.
She was there when that doctor said, she may never use it again. And I was like, I pray to God that Nevaeh didn't hear that, because I would never want that to be her thought. And that never actually was her thought. That's why I feel like she's been so good, because she's and healing and working, because she has never taken that and been like, that's my reality.
Yep.
She's been like, forget it. I am getting it back.
Yeah.
And then she graduated at 6 months and did soccer that summer.
Yeah.
And they said, yep, she can do soccer.
Yeah. She was running around. I mean, it didn't last long because she took a ball to the face and got a bloody nose. But
listen,
she was running around kicking the soccer ball like a couple months after she recovered from all of her PT and OT.
Yep.
And I mean, the PT and OT, they were obviously blown away. They're like, this is incredible. We don't see this that often.
She came in a wheelchair and she left 6 months later walking.
Yeah, no assistance.
Moving her arms.
Yep.
It was hard work for the entire family. And she had a positive attitude about it the whole time. And I think a huge part of that was your and I's outlook on it as well. you're afraid of or how you react to certain situations. And I am really thankful because you have always had a very positive outlook on life. My parents have always had that. And I know I've shared this in podcasts before, but my mom, as annoying as it was when I was a kid, she would always say, you can always choose joy. You can always choose joy. And I would be like, what do? You know?
In the moment, I don't want to hear that.
When you're upset, nobody wants to hear, choose joy, Courtney. You're like, Mom, you know, you're a teenager. But growing up with that has made me, especially going through the hardest stuff, like even with type 1, I remember when she got diagnosed and I was like, thank you, God, for insulin. Yeah. Because if we did not have insulin, she wouldn't be here in general.
Correct.
And insulin is what keeps our baby alive.
Yep.
And so, yes, is it really hard and really annoying? Absolutely. But our kid is here.
Yeah.
Because of it.
Yeah. I think you made a good point. It's so hard because as parents, even if you do have a positive outlook on life, it is hard to not let those fears creep in.
Yeah.
And really take control. So,
yeah. But we had to keep each other check all the time because he would have a breakdown and I would be the strong one. And then I would have a breakdown and he would be the strong one.
Right.
So we clawed out of it.
Yeah.
Somehow. And
that's a great way to put it.
Yeah. And it's okay. Like we still like, as much as it like affects us now, we just have a different outlook, but we know that like we both can lean on each other in the hardest times ever.
Yeah, that's important. It's important to have that support there with you and know when your partner is needing a break or needing you to step up.
Yeah.
And be the strong one and be the encouraging one. But as I was trying to say before I started getting choked up, like no matter if you've got the stuff going through your brain that is telling you the opposite and this is going to be our new reality and stuff, like it is so important to, even though they're always going to be in the back of your brain, to outwardly show we're going to be positive and we're going to look at the positives, like you said, every day, whether it was seeing the sunshine or something like that, just always showing your individual, your person, your child that is going through that. We're going to stay positive, because if we were sat around just complaining and talking about the negative and woe is me and you're going through this kind of thing, like that's not going to lead to healing.
Right. I do think it is important though. We don't have this like toxic positivity. When Nevaeh was struggling, we just let her, like we had to go through it. She had to go through it. And we sat there when she was in the hospital and she was crying or frustrated and didn't really want to talk, just brushing her hair, just being there. Sometimes if somebody's struggling, just being there and not saying anything, brushing their hair, braiding their hair, painting their fingernails, giving them a foot massage, whatever it is, you don't have to say anything, but just being there, I think helps. Even when it's like the hardest, like we looked at her so many times and like, you are doing such a good job. Yeah. It is okay to be upset.
Yeah.
She's like, I'm not.
I know.
I'm not. And I remember being like, and she said it with such confidence.
Yeah, she really did.
I'm not upset. Do you remember when the PT said, are you mad this happened to you? And she went, no. Like, it's like she was confused by the question. Like, why would I be mad?
Right.
About this? Like, it just kind of happened.
Is what it is. She's always had that mentality. When she had her 2 subsequent brain surgeries a couple years later, like she had that one was done. And then we went in for a checkup and they were like, well, you can wait until the summer to do it so she doesn't miss school, but we'd prefer if you get it done sooner than later. What do you think, Nevaeh? And she was like, sounds good to me. Like,
she's like, get it over with.
Yeah, let's do another brain surgery. She said,
brain surgery is not that bad. You just go to bed and you wake up and it's over. I'm like, yeah, yep, that's exactly right.
Yep.
That's exactly right.
Love the outlook.
She's so just, She reminds me a lot. I mean, she reminds me a lot of my dad that way. Just, he had cancer, and I remember asking him, because they told him he was going to die. And I was like, how did you deal with that? And he's like, I knew I wasn't going to die. Yeah. And I'm like, oh.
There's seriously so much power in that. And just grabbing a hold, just having that stigma and just grabbing a hold of it.
And even, I think too, they just have this piece of everyone's going to die. I know my dad at that time, we all are going to die anyway.
Yeah.
Obviously, maybe Nevaeh doesn't have that thought, but I know my dad probably did. It is what it is.
Right.
What can I do? But I do want to, in our podcast, when we have these guests on sharing their stories and stuff, I want to, for me personally, having friends and family and just our community, I want to learn better on how I can be helpful to my friends, family, community when they are going through something hard. So every time we have a podcast, I just want to have just a quick discussion of if we were to go through this again, how would you like your friends or family to show up for you?
Yeah.
Differently. Yep. When you're going through it, I think a lot of people, I know Rachel, my best friend, my mom, my sister, my mom, not so much because she went through something really hard too, which we will talk about. But for us personally, there was a lot of, what can I do to help you? What can I do to help you? And I did not have the mental capacity to say, I need you to help me with laundry. My brain was such a mess that I remember being I don't know. I don't know. So if you have somebody going through really, really hard things, the only thing that I feel like I can recommend is just show up.
Yep.
Just be there. Sit with them. You don't have to have the answer, because you don't have the answer. When people would tell me, it's going to be okay, I would go, you don't know that.
Right.
Don't tell me that.
Yeah.
I remember our best friend Jason saying that to me. And I told him, I was like, I just want you to know that's not helpful to me, because you don't know that. And he said, yeah, you're right. Yeah. I just want to say that because I feel like that's what I should say, but you are right.
It's a super good point, because I feel like that's just default. That's what you want to say when somebody's going through something, be like, it's going to be fine. I'll be praying for you or something like that. But to your point, and it's not just you or how you are, anybody going through something big, whether it's somebody having surgery or a stroke or going through a divorce or losing a child, whatever it is, anything tragic, they don't have the mental capacity. If you're going to ask them, what can I do to help? If you've been through it, you know it. You've got your brain blocked. All you're thinking about, you're in survival mode.
When people say, what do you want? I wanted to be I want my daughter to be 1000% correct and normal right now. But you can't do that.
100%. That's so accurate. That's all that you want. And so in that sense, just don't think, don't ask, just do. Just be. You said, just show up. Or we had random people just, hey, I'm outside the hospital with coffee. Our friend Steve would stop by because he lived down in the area and drop off
Cassandra
coffee.
Did too. Do you remember Cassandra came?
Cassandra did, because she used to live there. DoorDash. Rachel just went to our house, did a bunch of our laundry, cleaned.
Yeah.
Your mom's taking care of the boys, just keeping them busy. People just doing that, just showing up, and us coming home to a clean house and having our cupboard stocked and things clean, and our kids are taken care of. And that stuff is such a massive blessing, because you can't fix our child or you can't fix a situation we're going through, but it's the little things without asking that are just thank you so much. For anybody that did that while we're going through it, that's the biggest thing that we want to bring awareness to, is just don't ask, because you can't do what they want you to do, or they can't think of what they want you to do for them.
I 1000% think that they will not tell you exactly what they want you to do, because I also had this weird feeling of guilt because I knew I had a lot of laundry to do, but I would never want to ask somebody to do my laundry.
Right.
And Rachel just came over and she just did it. And I didn't even ask. And I remember being like, I would have never asked you to do that, but like, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Or even coming over and like braiding my hair. I couldn't think to do anything besides just be there for Nevaeh.
Yeah.
And so like there was a meal train set up, which was also a huge blessing. Nevaeh has celiac. So like making gluten-free things, I know, we had a lot of friends just show up with food.
Yep.
And if you sent food or gifts or whatever for our family, but also included the boys too, like that was so, people are incredibly thoughtful. And I do want to say too, there are some times that you expect, I just want to say, if you do go through something really hard, don't expect, because there are some times that maybe who you think would be the closest to you doesn't show up the way you think they should.
Yeah.
But I just want you to also recognize that if somebody doesn't show up the way you think that they should, it's because they don't know how.
Right.
And they're too afraid to ask you. So there are people that will just show up, and, you have to take what people give with their capacity. Because some people are just like, their daughter is having a stroke. I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Okay.
That's fine.
Yeah.
There's obviously no expectation put on anybody in situations like this. It's just more of, some people are just like, let's just go do something.
Yeah.
Let's bring something over. Let's do this. Gas cards. We got a lot of gas cards because they knew how much PT and OT driving back and forth.
In the hospital. It was, I just want to thank you guys, because while we were going through that, not only did our family and our friends just show the fuck up, but so did our online community.
Absolutely.
You guys sent prayers and just gifts for Nevaeh for PT stuff that we used for her stuff. She had those those squishies, whatever, those mallow, those pillows.
Oh,
she had like 1,000 of them. Do you remember?
Oh, yeah, the squishmallows.
Squishmallows. Yeah.
I was like, what?
I'm like a marshmallow.
Oh, she had like 30. So
she loved collection. It. She could take it with her. And so because you guys were so helpful, it has taken us like a full circle moment to go, okay, you guys showed up for us and helped and prayed and just gave us support. And so we in turn want to also help our community too. I know there are so many of you with stories. Our story isn't just Nevaeh had a stroke. We have a lot more stories, but that was the catalyst to our mental health journey and being more mentally strong. And so we just want to give you guys a platform to share your stories and your organizations, because Nevaeh, like there could organizations that are close to you, and we want to share and give that platform for you guys.
Yeah.
Because life, it's not about us. It's about what we can do to help.
Yeah.
And that's when you feel the most like fulfilled, is helping others go through freaking hard things. Like we went through the hardest thing and I was like, Lord, what is the purpose here?
Yeah.
Do you remember thinking that?
Yeah.
Like
every single day.
Yeah.
Yep.
How can we make this good?
Yeah.
And here we are 5 years later.
Yeah. It's come full circle because of you guys and the outpouring that you showed our family and the support that we feel. We want to turn around and bless you guys back and give you guys a platform and an opportunity to share your stories and to be able to show you support organizations that you've started.
And I don't think like before that we could have mentally handled like some of the stories that we were getting for this podcast. They are incredibly incredible and inspiring and hopeful, but they are hard.
Really hard
to hear.
Yep.
And I don't think we could have mentally been able to do that.
No,
5 years ago. We have changed so much. I mean, mentally and like in our guts.
Yeah.
We are different.
Completely different than we were a couple years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, you specifically, I know you've said multiple times, like, I don't know who I am. I'm all emotional. I'm starting to feel feelings more.
Yeah.
Which is awesome. Yeah. Cause I joke with Courtney all the time about being thick candy shell.
An M&M.
An M&M with a thick candy shell. But it is going to be, we're so excited for this platform and to create this space. We know, like Courtney said, it is going to be raw. It's going to be hard. It's going to be emotional, but literally
so inspiring.
We feel like everything that we've gone through has created us for this time to be able to give you guys this space to share the story and to cry with you and to bring support to you.
Yeah. We can't wait. Yeah. And so I just want to mention one more time, we have a link at the bottom of this podcast. Yep. And if you have a story, if you are listening to our story and you feel this in your gut where you have butterflies in your stomach and your heart rate is up and you're like, I really want to share my story. I'm scared. Fill it out. And we will be here for whenever you are ready to share your story. We would love to eventually, like, it's just in our small town right now, but we are just going to sit with you. We're going to have coffee with you, hopefully go get Pompeii with you.
Yep. Just to provide a little bit more clarity. As of right now, we're just like local, like people in Minnesota that want to share their story. That's what we're taking right now. But we have a bigger vision of like, as we travel and go on trips and stuff, or make specific trips to certain people or areas where we have a bunch of people that want to do podcasts. Like, it's going to grow. The platform's going to grow. Yeah. As of right now, we're just keeping it to the Minnesota area.
If you are in Alaska, Anchorage, Alaska, we will be there in July.
End of July.
And if you have a inspiring story you would love to share, we would love to read about it and get in contact with you.
Yep.
So that's just a little bit of our story now, but we have so much more for you guys and we cannot wait to share.
Yes. So excited.
All right, you guys. I don't know how to end this now. It's not as cheerful, but thank you guys for listening. We appreciate you so freaking much.
Yes, we do.
And we will see you next week.
See you guys.
Bye.